The worst part wasn't finding out my best friend had been sleeping with my fiancée. The worst part was finding out my own parents had known for 4 months. Decided I didn't need to know. I'm still not sure which betrayal sits heavier in my chest. When I wake up at 3 in the morning, I've had 2 years to think about it, and I still don't have a clean answer. My name is Adrian. I'm 32 years old. I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in Ottawa, which means I spend my days finding things people try very hard to hide. Falsified invoices, misreported expenses, numbers that don't add up the way they're supposed to. I'm good at it. I notice patterns. I notice when something feels slightly off even before I can explain why. That skill saved me from making the worst mistake of my life. It also broke me in ways I'm still quietly putting back together. I met Jenna at a friend's cottage weekend up near Calabogie in the summer of 2021. She was loud and funny, and completely unself-conscious, in a way I'd always envied in other people. I was the guy in the corner nursing a beer and pretending to be very interested in the dock. She came and sat next to me and said, "You look like you're calculating the structural load of this pier." I told her, I was actually, at least a little bit. She'd like that was the best thing she'd heard all week, and I was gone. Completely gone. We dated for a year and a half before I proposed. I did it at Rideau Hall in the fall, during one of those October days, when Ottawa is embarrassingly beautiful, and you almost forgive it for what it does to you in February. She said yes before I'd even finished the sentence. I thought we were the kind of couple that would make it. My best friend since university, a guy I'll just call my best friend, because he doesn't deserve to have his name in my mouth anymore, had been part of my life for 11 years. We met in first year at Carleton, survived the same nightmare stats professor, moved into the same apartment in third year, were each other's wingmen at every terrible house party, from 2012 to 2015. He was the first person I called after Jenna said yes. He cried on the phone, actual tears. He said, "Man, you deserve this. You really do." I believed him. I had absolutely no reason not to. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly in the details that seem meaningless until suddenly they're not. Looking back, there were things, small things. Jenna being a little distant in the weeks before I noticed anything. My best friend finding reasons to not come around as much, always busy, always is something. The two of them texting in ways that seemed normal because why wouldn't they text? They were both part of my life. None of it registered as anything. I was planning a wedding. I was busy. I trusted the two people I trusted most. I found out on a Thursday evening in March. I came home from work early because a client meeting got canceled. And I had a headache that was building behind my left eye, and I just wanted to lie down in my own apartment. Jenna and I had been living together for 8 months at that point. In a 2-bedroom place in Westboro that we were renting, while we saved up for a down payment. I had my key in the door and I could hear voices inside, which wasn't unusual. Jenna worked from home. She had calls sometimes, she had friends over sometimes. I pushed the door open. I don't need to describe what I saw. I think anyone who has ever had to describe that moment to someone else knows that there's no version of it that doesn't feel like standing outside your own body. I just stood there. I don't know for how long. Long enough for both of them to see me. Long enough for the expression on my best friend's face to go from shock to something that looked almost like relief. Like some part of him was glad it was finally over. I left. I didn't say anything. I just turned around, closed the door, and walked back down the stairs and outside into the cold air, and stood on the sidewalk for probably 10 minutes, trying to remember how breathing worked. I called my mom. This is the part I think about most, the part where I called my mom. It was 5:30 on a Thursday afternoon. So she picked up on the second ring, and I told her what I just walked in on. And I waited. And she went very quiet in a way that didn't feel like shock. It felt like the quiet of someone who is trying to find the right words for something they already know is coming. She said, "Adrian. Oh, sweetheart, come over." I drove to my parents' place in Barhaven, on autopilot. My dad was home. He met me at the door with his hand on my shoulder, and that specific look that fathers get when they know they've done something wrong, but they're still deciding how to frame it. My mom made tea. There's something very Canadian about being handed tea during the worst moment of your life. Like the ritual of it is supposed to smooth the edges off the conversation that's coming. They told me they'd known since November. It was March. They had known for 4 months. My mom had found out through a mutual family friend, who'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see at a restaurant in the Glebe. She'd confronted my best friend directly. Not Jenna, not me, him. And he'd admitted it and cried. And told her it was a mistake that was already over. She'd believed him. She'd decided not to tell me because she didn't want to destroy my relationship over something that might have already resolved it itself. She and my dad had agreed together. They had sat in the kitchen I grew up in and made the decision that I didn't get to know. They'd watched me come over for Sunday dinners for 4 months, watched me talk about wedding venues and honeymoon ideas and how excited I was, and they hadn't said a word. My dad said, We were trying to protect you. I sat with that for a long moment. The tea was too hot to drink and I held the mug anyway because I needed something to hold. From what? I asked. He didn't have a good answer, neither of them did. I drove home that night. Not to our apartment, to my buddy Connor's place in Canada. Because I needed to be somewhere that hadn't been contaminated yet. Connor is the kind of friend who doesn't ask questions. He handed me a beer, put on hockey, and let me sit there for 3 hours barely saying anything. I will owe him for that for the rest of my life. Jenna called 14 times that night. My best friend called 3 times. And then apparently thought better of it. I didn't answer any of them. I wasn't ready to have a conversation where I would have to listen to explanations. I didn't want explanations. I wanted to understand how the geometry of my life had shifted so completely without my knowing. Over the next few days I stayed at Connor's, and I thought about things very carefully, the way I think about things at work when a set of numbers doesn't reconcile. I made a list. This is maybe the most forensic accountant thing about me. When I am falling apart emotionally, I make lists. I wrote down what I knew, what I needed to know, and what I needed to do. The what I needed to do column got very long very quickly. Jessa and I weren't married. That made things cleaner in some ways, more complicated in others. We had a joint account we'd opened specifically for wedding savings. There was about $14,000 in it, split roughly evenly between our contributions. I had documentation of every transfer I'd made into that account. Because I'm a forensic accountant, and I document everything, I went to my bank branch on Bank Street on a Saturday morning and I withdrew my $7,200 in contributions. And I moved them to a personal account Jenna didn't know existed. I wasn't stealing anything. I was taking back exactly what I had put in, with records to prove it. The apartment lease was in both our names. I talked to a tenant rights advisor, there are free ones through the city, and got clear on my options. I was not going to be the one who left. That apartment was mine as much as it was hers. And I was not going to be displaced from my own life by the 2 people who had already taken enough from me. I sent Jenna a text that simply said, I need you out of the apartment by the end of the month. I'll be back on Sunday evening. Please be gone, or at least give me the space I'm entitled to by law. Then I blocked her number, her email, and her on every platform we shared. Because I had said what I needed to say, and I was done being available for her version of events. My best friend texted me a long message. I didn't read past the first line, which was, I know there's nothing I can say. He was right about that. I blocked him too. The engagement ring I'd bought her was a white gold solitaire, from a jeweler on Sparks Street. It had cost me $6,000 and change. Jenna had taken it off, and left it on the kitchen counter when she moved her things out. Which I was grateful for. Though I noticed she'd taken a few things that were mine. A cast iron pan, a record player I'd had since university. And left behind a few things that were hers. As if the whole transaction had been handled by someone who wasn't really paying attention. I didn't chase it. The record player wasn't worth what that conversation would have cost me. I took the ring to an estate jeweler and sold it for just under $4,000, which I put toward a solo vacation I took in June to Tofino, where I sat on a beach and watched the Pacific Ocean and started to feel incrementally like a person again. What I haven't talked about yet is the family meeting. About 3 weeks after everything fell apart, my mom called and asked me to come for dinner. She said she wanted us to talk. I agreed. Because despite everything I wasn't ready to cut my parents off. And because a part of me wanted to believe that they understood they had done something serious. And wanted to make it right. I got there, and my aunt and uncle were also there. Nobody had mentioned they would be there. They were sitting at the dining room table, with the look of people who had been briefed in advance. And had opinions they were very ready to share. My aunt opened with, Adrian, you need to think about whether throwing away a 7-year friendship is really what you want to do here. My uncle nodded in that way. Men of his generation nod when they think they're being wise. I want to describe what happened in that room, very precisely, because I've replayed it enough times that I have it nearly memorized. I sat down. I did not raise my voice. I come from a long line of people who raise their voices, and I've spent years training myself out of it, because I find it more effective to be quiet. I said. I'm happy to have this conversation. But I want to be clear about what we're actually talking about. We're not talking about whether I can forgive someone. We're talking about whether the people in this room understand that they withheld information from me for months that I had every right to have. I looked at my mom. And I'd like to hear someone, I looked at my dad. Say that what you did was wrong before we get to advice about my friendships. Silence. My aunt said, they were trying to protect you. Same words, same framing. Like they'd all agreed on it in advance, which I realize now they probably had. My uncle said, these things are complicated. You don't always know what to do in a situation like this. My mom said, I thought it was over. I genuinely thought. I know what you thought, I said. I'm asking if you think it was wrong. Nobody said yes. Not one person at that table could look at me and say, yes, we were wrong, we should have told you, I'm sorry. What I got instead was context and justification, and the quiet implication that my upset was slightly disproportionate, given how much they'd been trying to help. I ate dinner. I ate the entire dinner, which is something I'm still a little proud of. Because it was a form of refusal to perform the drama they might have expected. I said goodbye politely. I drove home. That night I wrote an email. I'm not someone who sends emails when I'm angry. I'm someone who drafts them, sleeps on them, reads them again in the morning and usually deletes most of the heat. This email I drafted on Sunday night. I read again Monday morning and changed almost nothing. It was addressed to my parents, my aunt and uncle, and 3 other relatives who had been in contact in the weeks prior, to offer their own unsolicited assessments of my situation. It was not a dramatic email. It did not use words like betrayal or unforgivable. It was clear and specific. It outlined the timeline of what my parents knew and when they knew it. It explained that I had been planning a wedding during those 4 months, making financial commitments, emotional telling people in my life that I was getting married. It said that withholding information of that magnitude from a person who is actively making major life decisions based on incomplete information is not protection. It is a choice made for someone else's comfort, at someone else's expense. It said that I needed distance. It said that I would reach out when I was ready, and that I hoped by then, people would have had the time to actually reckon with what had happened, rather than finding ways to explain it. I sent it on Monday morning at 8:45, which is when I send work emails, because I wanted it to feel considered and not impulsive. The responses were varied. My aunt replied within 20 minutes, to tell me that I had always had a tendency to be cold, and that I was hurting my mother. My uncle didn't reply at all. One of the relatives I'd included sent back 2 words. Understood, sorry. That was the only apology I received from anyone in my family during that entire period. 2 words from someone I hadn't even been that close to. I still think about that. My parents called. I let it go to voicemail. My dad left a message that was 7 minutes long, and mostly about how difficult this had been for my mom. Which is a particular kind of message that I don't have the energy to unpack here. I texted him back and said I needed time and that I would be in touch. The months that followed were the quietest of my adult life. I'm an introvert by nature. I've always been better with a few close people than with large groups, and those few close people had just been reduced considerably. I had Connor. I had a couple of work friends. I had a therapist named Dr. OC who I started seeing in April and who was worth every dollar of the sessions my benefits didn't cover. I ran. I had always run. But I got serious about it in a way I hadn't been before. Training for the Ottawa Race Weekend half marathon in May. Spending my Saturday mornings on the Rideau River pathway, watching the ice break. And then the water clear and then the summer come in with its usual optimism. I went back to work and I was honestly good at it. There's something clarifying about grief. It burned off a lot of the ambient anxiety I'd carried for years. The low hum of trying to keep everyone comfortable. I stopped being afraid of difficult conversations at work. I stopped softening findings in my reports when people weren't going to like them. My manager noticed and gave me a strong review. I took on 2 new clients. I started going to the gym at lunch instead of eating at my desk. The Tofino trip in June was the pivot point. I booked a 5-night stay at a small inn near Chesterman Beach. I hiked. I ate a lot of very good fish. I sat on the beach in the evenings with a jacket on because the Pacific Coast doesn't do warm summer evenings the way central Canada does. And I watched the waves and I let myself grieve properly. Not the contained, functional grief I'd been managing in Ottawa, but the real thing. I cried on the second night, sitting in the inn's small common room with a glass of wine, while an older couple across the room pretended very politely not to notice. I was grateful to them for that. When I got back I called my parents. I want to be honest about this part. I called them because I missed them, and because I'm not actually someone who finds it easy to shut people out, even when those people have done serious things. My mom cried. My dad was quieter than usual. There wasn't a big dramatic reckoning. No one sat down and delivered a formal apology with full acknowledgement of every wrong. What there was a slow, halting conversation that lasted about an hour and covered maybe a third of what needed to be covered. My mom said, "I know I made the wrong call. I know that now. It wasn't much, but it was something, and it was the first time anyone had actually said it, and I needed to hear it. We're still in a repair process, my parents and I. It's not fixed. Some things take a long time. But we're talking. We're seeing each other, and I can sit at their kitchen table and drink coffee without feeling like I'm performing a version of myself that isn't real." That's enough, for now. My best friend reached out once, about 6 months after everything, through a mutual acquaintance who asked if I'd be open to hearing from him. I said no. I didn't say it with anger. I just said no, because there are some things that can be repaired, and some things that can't, and I know the difference. 11 years of friendship didn't survive what he did. Not because I'm incapable of forgiveness, but because forgiveness and proximity are two different things. And I don't owe him. The second one. Jenna, I haven't spoken to at all. I don't know what she's doing. I don't want to. She exists in my life now, only as a very expensive lesson about the difference between someone who makes you feel good and someone who actually has integrity. And even that distinction, I'm told, is one most people have to learn at least once. The engagement ring money paid for half of Tofino. The rest I put into my TFSA. I'm writing this from my current apartment, which is a one-bedroom in Hindenburg, that I moved into last fall. It's the first place I've ever lived in completely alone, not with roommates, not with a partner, just me and roughly 400 square feet of my own choosing. I have the cast iron pan back. I found an identical one at a vintage market on Wellington West for $12, and I consider it an upgrade. The record player I replaced with a better one. I put a plant on the windowsill, and it has not died yet, which feels like a reasonable symbol of something. Here's what I know, 2 years out. The people who are supposed to love you will sometimes choose their own comfort over your right to the truth. That's not a reason to stop trusting people. It's a reason to pay attention. I spent a long time making things easy for everyone around me, softening hard conversations, absorbing disappointments quietly, being the person who keeps the peace. I'm not that person anymore. I still keep the peace where it's worth keeping, but I've learned to notice the difference between peace that's real and peace that's just. Everyone hoping I won't look too closely. I look closely. It's what I do. It turns out it's also the best thing about me.